The Ghost of Fossil Glen, Chapter 25. So Raymond Gagne just fell and died. Chapter 25. Hang on, Allie. You're going to be all right. Help is on the way. Don't try to move. Hang on. I can't. You can. Listen to me, Allie. You can do it. The voice was Mr. Henry's. It was calm and soothing, and when she thought she couldn't hold on any longer, it insisted that she could. And she did. Then more people were speaking to her from the top of the cliff this time. A rope appeared above her, and a man in a safety harness came down with it. He tied the rope around Allie and said, "It's all over now, honey. We're going up. It's okay. You can let go." But Allie couldn't let go. Her fingers refused to uncurl from their death grip on the cliff. Her feet wouldn't budge from their desperate hold on the rock. Finally, her rescuer gently pried open her hands and wrapped his arms tightly around her. Together they were pulled to the rim of the Glen to safety. Allie was carried to a waiting ambulance and placed on a stretcher, despite her protestations that she was really perfectly fine. As she was being loaded into the ambulance, she saw that a crowd had gathered. There were 2 town of Seneca police cars and a fire truck, as well as many trucks belonging to volunteer rescue workers from the neighborhood. One of the policemen walked over and stuck his head inside the back of the ambulance. "Do you know the identity of the man at the bottom of the Glen?" he asked. Allie nodded. "Raymond Gagne," she said. Her voice came out sounding dry and croaky. She cleared her throat and wet her lips. "There's another body, too," she added. "It's buried in the side of the cliff. You'll see. It's where Hoover, she's a dog, was digging." The policeman's eyes widened in surprise. "Another body?" he repeated. "Do you know who it is?" "Lucy Stiles," said Allie. "Lucy Stiles, that sounds familiar." His eyes narrowed with concentration. Then his expression turned to one of recognition. He said incredulously, "You mean the girl who fell off the cliff 4 years ago?" Allie nodded again as the ambulance driver appeared at the door. "We'll be heading to the hospital now, officer," he said. "I'll follow you," said the policeman. To Allie, he said, "I'll need to ask you some more questions after you get checked out by the doctor." Just then, Mr. Henry appeared, breathless from running up from the bottom of the Glen. "I'm here. I'm her teacher," he told the driver. "Okay if I ride along?" "Get in. Let's go." Mr. Henry slid into the seat beside Allie's stretcher. He grabbed her hand and she looked up into his worried face. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I'm fine, really," said Allie. At that moment, the siren sounded its urgent wail. Allie smiled. "I always wanted to ride in one of these things," she said. Mr. Henry laughed and looked relieved, but he soon became serious again. "Who is that man, and why were you so far up the Glen? I feel responsible for this, Allie. I should have kept my eye on you." Allie shook her head. "It's not your fault," she said. "I was chasing after Hoover." "Hoover? You mean she's the one who led you into this mess?" "Not exactly," Allie answered. "I was in it before. But if she hadn't run off, I wouldn't have followed her, and then I wouldn't have known that she'd discovered Lucy's body. So if you think about it, it worked out." "Wait a second," Mr. Henry said. "Back up. There's another body down there?" "It's Lucy Stiles," Allie answered solemnly. "Gagne murdered her." "Gagne?" Mr. Henry repeated, looking confused. "Raymond Gagne," said Allie. "Lucy's mother's boyfriend." Gagne was Lucy's nickname for him. At Mr. Henry's look of bewilderment, Allie explained. "See, I found Lucy's diary. That's how I knew about Gagne. He murdered Lucy, Mr. Henry. It wasn't an accident at all." Above the wailing of the siren, Allie told a spellbound Mr. Henry the bare facts about Lucy's death. When she finished, she said, "Lucy was a great journal writer, Mr. Henry. When I read her diary, I felt as if I knew her." "I bet the 2 of you would have been good friends," said Mr. Henry. "I told you she was special and smart like you." Allie felt her face flushing. To cover her embarrassment, she said, "I'm so glad she kept that diary. I mean, it helped me to solve her murder. But also, in a weird kind of way, when I read her words, it was almost as if she was talking to me, as if she was still alive." Mr. Henry nodded. "That's one reason I've been encouraging you to put your thoughts and dreams down in your journals." "Do you keep a journal, Mr. Henry?" Allie asked. "Sure do," Mr. Henry answered. He started to say something else, hesitated, then began again. "Allie," he said, "when I first got to you, when you were still hanging there on the cliff, you said something I'm wondering about." "I did? I don't remember. What did I say?" "You said, 'Thank you, Lucy.' Then I thought I heard you say, 'for saving my life.'" Mr. Henry looked quizzically at Allie. Oh, she didn't know what to say. How could she explain to Mr. Henry what had happened on the cliff? "Sometimes," Mr. Henry said quietly, "when it's difficult to talk about something, it helps to write it." "The way Lucy did in her diary," Allie said softly. The noise of the siren began to fade as the ambulance pulled into the entrance of the hospital. How did you find me anyway? Allie asked. She was curious, but she also needs time to decide how much, if anything, she wanted to tell Mr. Henry about Lucy's ghosts. Are you kidding? Your scream came echoing down the glen and we all came running. As soon as I saw you and the body on the ground, I sent the kids back to school for help, and I stayed there with you. That's when I heard you talking. He paused. I'd like to hear the whole story sometime, Allie, about you and Lucy. Allie looked out the window, thinking. Maybe in your next journal entry. Maybe, she said uncertainly. Then looking into Mr. Henry's eager, open face, she said, All right, I'll write the whole story. With a grin, she added, You've already read the beginning. I kind of thought so, said Mr. Henry, grinning back. The ambulance door opened and a hospital attendant appeared. Mr. Henry scrambled out of his seat. As Allie was lifted out of the ambulance and wheeled inside, he called, I'm going to wait until your parents arrive and then I've got to get back to school. I'm afraid to think of what Hoover might be up to. You take care now. I'll see you on Monday. Allie waved. Bye, Mr. Henry. Thanks. In a little cubicle in the emergency room, Allie was examined thoroughly, even though she tried to tell the doctor that she was okay. Despite her scrapes and her sprained ankle, she really did feel fine, except when she thought about being on the cliff with Raymond Gagney. His terrified scream echoed through her head again and again, and worse, it was followed by the horrible thud of his landing. But what she thought about most were the words Gagney had spoken right before he fell. After the doctor had taken her temperature and blood pressure, made sure she could follow a finger with both of her eyes and poked her there and here, find out what her parents arrived, breathless with concern. They hugged her over and over and again and asked the doctor what seemed like 100 questions. Then the policeman came into the little examining room and asked Allie to tell him what she knew about the bodies in the Glen. Here we go again, she thought. Feeling suddenly tired, she said, There's a red leather book in my desk at home that will help explain everything. Your journal? Asked her mother in a puzzled voice. No, said Allie. It belonged to Lucy Stiles. It's the diary Mr. Curtis was looking for. His boss is the dead man in the Glen. Mrs. Nichols' hand flew to her mouth and her eyes grew round. What in the world? You know that man? Her father asked with astonishment. Sort of, Allie answered. She looked at the expression of amazement on the three faces above her, took a deep breath, and prepared to tell her story. Or at least most of it.